Welcome to Whispers of Crime. Today we're looking at a case that is, well, it's one of those haunting and frankly frustrating cold cases in British history.
It truly is. This is the case of Anne Noblett, often called the deep freeze murder.
And it begins with a date, December 30th, 1957.
Yes. Anne Noblett, a 17-year-old girl, vanishes. She vanishes in just 5 minutes.
5 minutes? How is that even possible?
Between her bus stop and her own front door, it was a quarter-mile walk, and then she was just gone.
And nobody saw anything.
Nothing. 32 days later, they find her body in the woods, frozen solid.
Frozen. But wait, wasn't the winter '58 unusually mild?
That's the core of the mystery. It was far too mild to freeze a body. The pathologist, a very famous one, said someone had to have kept her in a freezer.
For how long?
For about 2 weeks. Then they dressed her.
They dressed her?
Yes. But they did it wrong. The buttons on her undergarments were mismatched. Her glasses were crooked on her face. Her arms were folded as if she were sleeping.
That's incredibly disturbing.
And there's more. 12 coins were scattered around her body. Her purse, her watch, they weren't stolen. The coins were placed there.
So this wasn't a robbery?
Not at all. The police ended up interrogating over 2,000 people. They searched every single farm with a freezer for miles around.
And found nothing?
Nothing. Until private detectives got on the case, they cracked it. They gave the police one name, a single suspect. The authorities sealed the file. They refused to prosecute. 66 years later, that name has never been released to the public.
Someone powerful wanted this buried.
It seems that way. So the question is, why?
Let's try and find out. Before we go any further, though, if you're joining us, make sure you're following Whispers of Crime.
That's right. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, all the usual platforms. It helps us keep bringing you updates on these cases.
And don't forget our YouTube channel, also called Whispers of Crime.
Okay, so to really understand the gravity of this, we need to know who Anne Noblett was.
Right. She wasn't just a name in a file. She was a person, a daughter.
Anne Teresa Noblett. She was 17, born in 1940. And her family was quite prominent in Hertfordshire. Her father, Thomas Noblett, managed a company called Helmets Ltd.
They made motorcycle crash helmets, right? A pretty significant business.
A very significant business. He also owned a large, successful poultry farm where the family lived, at a place called Heath Cottages in Marshalls Heath.
So she came from a stable, affluent background. This wasn't a teenager with a troubled life.
Well, in the slightest. And that's what makes it so jarring. Everyone who knew her, family and friends, they all described her the same way.
Right.
Quiet, shy, gentle, a real home-loving person.
And independent, I read.
Yes, independent but cautious. She'd just come back from 4 years at a finishing school in Montreux, Switzerland.
Yeah.
She was studying domestic science with this goal of becoming a children's nurse.
And the police reports, they confirmed. No boyfriends, no enemies, nothing like that.
Absolutely nothing. No known entanglements at all.
Yeah.
Which brings us to what her father said at the inquest. It's just heartbreaking.
What was that?
He stated under oath that his daughter Anne had no cares or worries whatsoever.
For a family with no worries, can you imagine the terror when she just doesn't walk through that door?
It must have been immediate. Her routine was like clockwork. That evening, December 30th, was a Monday. It was rainy, miserable. Anne had gone to her weekly rock and roll dance lesson.
A normal teenage activity.
Completely normal. It was at a place called Lord's Hall in Harpenden. Because of the bad weather, she and her friend actually went to an earlier session, so they ended up leaving around 5:30 p.m., a little ahead of schedule.
And that small change, leaving maybe half an hour early, that could have been everything.
It's the kind of detail that haunts you. It might have put her directly in the killer's path. From the dance hall, she walked to the bus stop and boarded the 391 Green Line bus, heading home to Marshalls Heath.
And she was carrying things, right? Mundane, everyday things.
The most ordinary things imaginable. A letter from a friend and a bag of mushrooms she'd bought for their dinner that night.
So we have a very precise timeline from this point on.
We do. At exactly 6:00 p.m., we have our last confirmed sighting. A woman named Shirley Edwards, who was 21, saw Anne get off the bus.
And Shirley Edwards knew her.
Yes, she actually worked at the Noblett's poultry farm, so she recognized Anne instantly. She saw her get off near a pub called the Cherry Trees and start that final 40-mile walk home along Marshalls Heath Lane. They even exchanged a quick hello.
A quick greeting, a familiar face, and then she steps into the dark. That lane, It was isolated, wasn't it?
Utterly. Pitch black. There was no street lighting at all back then. It was the perfect spot for an ambush.
And her father got home not long after.
He arrived at 6:40 p.m. When he saw she wasn't there, he was immediately worried. It was completely out of character for her to be late. By 9 p.m., he'd called the police.
The abduction was likely over long before that call was ever made.
Long before. The evidence suggests it was all over by 6:10 p.m. at the latest.
And that comes from a key witness.
A very key witness. A local railway crossing keeper. She told police that shortly after 6 o'clock, she heard a car she didn't recognize driving towards the crossing at a very high speed.
What made her remember it specifically?
It was the car's behavior. It sped up, paused for just a moment, and then reversed and sped away again, back the way it came. The speed and that strange maneuver stuck in her mind.
So the car either stopped right where Anne was walking, or went just past her and had to back up.
That's the chilling implication. This doesn't sound like a random, opportunistic crime. It suggests planning.
And that 5-minute window.
Yeah.
That's been calculated precisely, hasn't it?
It has. Shirley Edwards sees Anne at 6:03 p.m. Then, by about 6:08 p.m., two other men who'd just gotten off a bus a bit further down the road, they reported seeing a car's rear lights speeding away up that same lane.
5 minutes, that's all it took? To grab a 17-year-old girl and disappear into the night.
It suggests a swift, violent abduction. And it points to someone who knew that area intimately, someone who knew the bus schedule, knew the lane was unlit, and knew exactly where Anne would be at her most vulnerable.
But the police response was, well, for 1957, it was huge.
It was extraordinary for rural England at the time. You had Detective Chief Superintendent Robert Elwell from the local force, but he was very quickly joined by Detective Superintendent Richard Lewis.
From Scotland Yard's murder squad.
The best they had. They immediately mobilized a massive search effort.
And massive is not an exaggeration here. We're talking hundreds of people.
Over 700 people in total. Think about that. 400 police officers, some brought in from other forces, working alongside 300 civilian volunteers. The local Rotary Club, even people from the local fox hunt, all out there searching.
It was a Herculean effort, as the police called it.
It really was. They covered an incredible amount of ground. Fields, woodlands, they searched a 3.5-kilometer stretch of the River Lee. They even drained flooded gravel pits.
They checked rubbish dumps, I believe.
Yes, the huge ones near Luton. They were looking everywhere. The investigation was so broad they even brought in Interpol to check on her time in Switzerland, just in case a connection existed there.
And after all that, all those man-hours, all that effort, they found almost nothing.
Next to nothing. A mud-stained handkerchief and a lipstick were found, but they couldn't even confirm they belonged to Anne. The big search lasted over 3 weeks, but on January 22nd, 1958, they officially called it off. They shifted to quieter, house-to-house inquiries instead.
And then the discovery.
Then, 32 days after she vanished, the case broke wide open, January 31st, 1958.
It was two brothers, wasn't it? Caught walking their dog.
That's right. Hugh Simons, who was a pilot in the RAF, and his 14-year-old brother Brian, they were in a place called Rosegrove Woods near Whitwell. Their dog, named Rip, ran ahead into the woods.
And Rip found her.
He ran into a clearing about 100 yards in. Hugh followed him, and there she was. The location was about 6 or 7 miles from where she was taken.
And the state of the scene was immediately suspicious.
Very. The woods were dense, the ground was rough. But investigators found no drag marks. None at all.
Which means she was carried.
She had to have been carried into that clearing and deliberately placed there.
And her physical condition. After 32 days, you'd expect significant decomposition.
You would, but she was, and this is the quote, remarkably well preserved. She was fully clothed, and she was frozen, completely solid.
Which, as we said, was impossible given the weather.
Impossible, but it was the arrangement of the body, the posing, that really took this crime to another level of macabre.
She was positioned to look like she was sleeping.
Meticulously. She was lying on her back, her arms folded neatly across her chest. This wasn't someone who'd been dumped in a hurry. This was a performance. It was a staged scene.
That's just one of the most haunting elements of this case. Why would a killer take the time to do that? To pose a body, fold the arms, even deal with her glasses?
Well, her glasses were still on her face, but they were slightly crooked. It's a small detail, but it's significant.
It suggests they were put back on by someone else.
Exactly. And her clothes were completely dry, which again made no sense after weeks of damp, mild weather. But the most telling detail, the one that proves she was redressed.
The buttons.
The buttons on her undergarments were done up incorrectly. A small mistake, but it tells a huge story.
So we have this contradiction. A careful, meticulous pose, but with these careless errors. What does that suggest to you? Intimacy, remorse.
It could be any of those. Or it could be a disturbing attempt at control, a desire to present a final, peaceful image to cover up the violence. But this perfect preservation, the fact that she was frozen, that led the investigation down a very specific and very strange path.
Right, to the central mystery, the artificial refrigeration.
The body being frozen solid was the big break. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Francis Camps,
A huge name in pathology at the time, the top of his field.
the most eminent pathologist in the country, and his finding was unequivocal. He said her body temperature was unnaturally low. His conclusion was that she'd been put into an artificial refrigeration unit almost immediately after death.
And kept there for how long?
He estimated for about 14 to 16 days, 2 weeks, before she was taken to the woods.
This completely changes the profile of the killer. This isn't just someone who committed a violent act. This is someone with access to some serious equipment.
Absolutely. We're not talking about a household freezer. This requires industrial capacity. And Dr. Camp's finding was immediately backed up by science.
With other records.
The Met Office records were crystal clear. After the first week of January 1958, temperatures rose significantly. The conditions just weren't there to naturally freeze a body. It had to be artificial.
So this dictates the entire next phase of the investigation.
It does. Now, the police aren't just looking for a person, they're looking for a place, a very specific kind of place.
Somewhere with a large freezer.
Right. They focus on 3 main possibilities. 1, a large industrial freezer like you'd find on a dairy or poultry farm, ironically, like the one Anne's own father owned. An old-fashioned ice room. Some 17th century estates still had these deep, subterranean, cold storage rooms in use. Or third, something mobile, like a refrigerated meat transport lorry.
And this led to this huge secondary search.
That immense search. They went back over their list of contacts. They interviewed more than 2,000 people again. They physically searched around 150 farms, food plants, and other businesses with refrigeration units.
Within a 30-mile radius.
A huge area. It was painstaking work, checking every unit, looking at usage logs, questioning owners and employees. And after all that...
They found nothing. The hiding place was never identified.
Never. The freezer, the storage location remains a complete mystery.
Let's turn to the autopsy itself, the cause of death. It was a bit complicated, wasn't it?
It was. The initial finding was strangulation, but Dr. Camps later revised that to asphyxiation caused by compression of the neck. But there were no obvious external marks of a violent struggle on her neck or body.
Which fits with that idea of a very quick, efficient abduction.
It does. The timeline of her death was also confirmed. Her stomach contents showed her last meal from 2:30 that afternoon was undigested. That means she was killed within hours of being taken. She died on the evening of December 30th.
And the assault was confirmed.
Yes, there was clear evidence of rape and sexual assault, but Dr. Camps added a really unusual note to his report.
About the cause of death?
Yes. He suggested that the asphyxiation might have been the result of sudden and intense emotional or mental stress or excitement.
What does that mean in plain English?
It opens up the possibility that her death might have been, in a legal sense, accidental. That she died from shock or panic during the assault, rather than the killer setting out with the explicit intent to murder her.
And that distinction would have had huge legal implications at the time.
Huge. And while the police were grappling with this, they were also breaking new ground forensically. This is where the case gets really innovative.
You're talking about the botanists, forensic botany.
The birth of it, really, in a major UK case, because physical evidence was so scarce, they turned to the environment where she was found. They brought in experts from the Rockhampton Research Station.
And their job was to figure out exactly how long the body had been lying in that clearing.
Precisely, to provide an independent timeline. And the way they did it was just brilliant for the 1950s.
You made a model of her, didn't they?
They created a life-size plaster of Paris model, weighted to be the exact same weight as Anne. They then placed this dummy in the clearing and watched what happened to the plants underneath it.
So they were measuring the compression, the rate of plant decay?
Exactly. They were creating a scientific control to see how the environment reacted over time, and their conclusion was definitive.
What did they find?
Their analysis showed the body could have been in those woods for no more than 10 to 14 days before it was discovered.
Which lines up perfectly with Dr. Camps's theory.
Perfectly. Murdered on December 30th, refrigerated for about 2 weeks, dumped in the woods around mid-January, and then lay there for another 10 to 14 days. It was this incredible combination of pathology, meteorology, and botany.
All this brilliant science all this clarity on the timeline, and yet the inquest in April 1958 still had to return a verdict of murder by person or persons unknown.
Yes, and before we move on to the next, truly a bizarre part of this case, we just want to remind you again to follow Whispers of Crime on your favorite podcast app.
That's right, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker. It really helps other people find the show. And while you're there, please consider leaving a positive review and rating. Also check out our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime.
Okay, so back to the scene in the woods. The posing of the body, the deep freeze aspect, it's all incredibly strange. But the items found around her, or rather not taken from her, they add this whole other layer of cold calculation.
The robbery that wasn't a robbery.
Exactly. Anne was wearing an expensive wristwatch. It was still on her wrist. Her purse was found nearby with 30 shillings in it. Nothing was stolen.
But there was other money found.
There was an extra 12 shillings in coins that belonged to Anne. They were scattered deliberately on and around her body.
It's such a strange detail. Why go to the trouble of scattering loose change?
Investigators developed a theory about this, and it's one of the most chilling aspects of the whole case. It suggests the killer wasn't just violent, but also had a working knowledge of the law.
Specifically, the Homicide Act of 1957.
You have to understand the legal landscape back then. Under that new act, the death penalty was reserved for only certain types of murder. Capital murder.
And murder committed during a robbery was one of them.
It was. Murder in the furtherance of theft carried a death sentence, but murder that occurred during a sexual assault, that did not.
So that was considered non-capital murder. Life in prison, but not the gallows.
A life or death distinction, and the police theory was that the killer knew this. By leaving the watch, leaving the purse, but scattering the coins, he was creating a false trail.
He was staging the scene to eliminate robbery as a motive.
He was trying to ensure that if he was caught, the crime would be framed exclusively as a sexual assault and murder, which would save his own life.
That is a level of cynical intelligence that is truly terrifying. He's planning his legal defense before he's even left the crime scene.
It's chilling. And of course, the coins were checked for fingerprints, but with the technology of the day, nothing usable was found.
The whole investigation was also plagued by, well, by distractions and hoaxes.
It was. While Anne was still missing, her mother started getting these awful, menacing phone calls. Then, after the body was found, Hugh Simons, the boy who found her, he started getting them too.
Threatening him.
Yes, telling him, "I'll be over to get you on Wednesday night." It created this cloud of fear over the whole community.
And it was just a cruel hoaxer.
A man named Walter Edward Nunn. He admitted making over 30 of these calls out of, in his words, pure spite. He had no connection to the murder at all. He got 6 months in prison for wasting police time.
But it was a major
A
diversion.
huge one. And there was another. In April '58, based on some anonymous letters, the police staged this big pre-dawn raid on a house in Westcliff-on-Sea.
This was in Essex, right?
Yes, near Southend. They arrested 2 men and questioned them for hours about Anne's murder and another case, the murder of Mary Creek.
Rock again, it was a dead end.
A complete dead end. The men were released without charge. The police just gave this very cryptic statement that the men had cleared some puzzling things up. It was another distraction that drained resources and momentum.
So with the official investigation stalling, the family took matters into their own hands.
By the summer of 1958, the Nobletts were understandably frustrated. They hired a well-known private detective firm, the Q-Men.
And these guys were often former Scotland Yard detectives, so they had the skills, but not the bureaucracy.
Exactly. They could move faster and cross jurisdictions more easily. And in this case, the firm made a very smart move. They put a female detective on the team, a woman named Billy Williams.
Which in 1958 would have been crucial.
Absolutely. Many women back then were just not comfortable talking to male police officers about sensitive topics, especially anything related to a sexual assault. Billy Williams was able to talk to female witnesses and get information the police may have missed.
And the Q-Men focused their investigation in a specific area, didn't they?
They did. They concentrated on the area in and around Southend, in Essex. They believed the killer had to have some connection to an industry that used large-scale refrigeration. And that part of Essex had a lot of food processing plants, large farms, transport companies.
And their focused approach worked?
It worked incredibly fast. After just 2.5 months, the Q-Men had narrowed a field of thousands of potential suspects down to a single name.
One person.
One suspect.
Okay.
And they compiled a complete dossier on him, a full case file. In September 1958, they presented it to the chief constable of Hertfordshire and the director of public prosecutions.
And they didn't just give them a name, they said they had enough evidence to prosecute.
They stated it explicitly. They believed they had sufficient evidence for an immediate arrest and a successful prosecution for the murder of Anne Noblett.
This should have been the end of the case, so what happened?
This is the most infuriating part of the entire story. The authorities did nothing.
Nothing.
No action was taken, no arrest was made, no prosecution was ever brought, and to this day, the suspect's name remains sealed. It has never been made public.
Why? Was an official reason ever given?
Never. The file was simply closed. And that silence, that refusal to act, is what has fueled speculation for over 60 years.
It's hard not to conclude that the suspect must have been someone important, someone connected, someone the establishment felt they had to protect.
It's the most logical, if deeply disturbing, conclusion. To have a private firm, staffed by ex-Scotland Yard pros, hand you a viable suspect on a platter, and then to bury it. It suggests a powerful motive beyond simple justice.
And all this was happening against a backdrop of public fear. The Deep Freeze murder was huge news.
It terrified people, and it seemed to fit a potential pattern. There were other unsolved murders of young women at the time.
Like the Diana Suddy case.
Yes, in 1956. She was found about 17 kilometers away, also sexually assaulted, strangled, picked up in a car. The method was very similar.
And then the Mary Creek murder happened just days after Anne disappeared.
That's right. January 5th, 1958. A Dutch au pair attacked right after getting off a bus late at night in Essex. Her body was found 10 miles away. Now, the police officially said the cases weren't linked, but for the public.
The pattern was terrifying. A bus stop killer.
Exactly. It created this sense that a maniac was on the loose and the police couldn't catch him. The name Deep Freeze murder stuck, and the case became the symbol of a sinister, unsolved crime. It's just incredible. On one hand, you have this case that failed so spectacularly, but on the other, it actually helped pioneer investigative techniques.
That's the great irony of it all. The investigation itself, the day-to-day work, was groundbreaking. This idea of bringing together a team, a pathologist, botanists, meteorologists, fiber experts, that was revolutionary for the 1950s.
They were creating the template for the modern, multidisciplinary, major crime investigation.
They really were. And even their data management was state-of-the-art. You have to remember, this is decades before computers.
So how did they track 2,000 interviews and all those leads?
One man, Detective Sergeant Frederick Taylor. He designed and ran this incredibly complex card index system, cross-referencing thousands of details about suspects, vehicles, and evidence. It was the height of information technology for its time.
All that incredible work on the front end. And yet, the one thing that could solve the case today was the one thing they failed at, preserving the evidence.
And that became the final nail in the coffin. In 2017, the Regional Major Crime Unit did a full cold case review, hoping that modern DNA technology could finally provide an answer.
That was the hope. But as the lead investigator, Mick Flavin, put it, had we had the forensic knowledge we have now, things could have been different.
What went wrong with the evidence?
It just wasn't preserved properly. Back in 1957, they were looking for things they could see, fingerprints, maybe bloodstains. They had no concept of trace DNA, of the microscopic evidence that might be clinging to her clothes or the coins.
So the evidence was contaminated or degraded over the years.
Exactly. The storage protocols just weren't there. When modern scientists went to look for DNA, especially mitochondrial DNA, which can survive for a long time, the samples were unusable. The evidence that could have named the killer was essentially gone.
The trail went cold because the physical evidence itself was allowed to die.
That's the tragedy. And based on that lack of evidence and the sheer passage of time, the 2017 review came to a somber conclusion. They believe there's a very good chance Anne's killer is now dead. The solution to the crime most likely died with the perpetrator.
So let's just summarize the final police theory of who this person was. What does the profile look like?
The consensus is that he was local. He had to be. He knew Anne's routine. He knew the dark lane. He knew the area. The need for a large freezer points to someone in business, a farmer, a butcher, someone in the food transport industry.
And they also suspected he might not have acted alone.
Right. The careful way she was redressed and posed made some investigators believe he may have had a female accomplice, perhaps a wife or a partner who helped him.
And he was smart. He watched the news.
He was very clever. He waited to dump the body until after the police announced they were scaling back the major search. He was actively managing his risk, monitoring the investigation from afar.
And so the case remains officially unsolved. The killer's name? the location of the freezer, and the truth behind that sealed Q-Men file. All of it remains a mystery.
It does. And before we share our final thoughts, please don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you get your podcasts.
Yes, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, also called Whispers of Crime. Like this episode, share it, and comment with your own suggestions. And please, leave us a positive review and rating if you can. It helps enormously.
When you look back at the Noblett case, it really is this stark lesson in forensic history. You see the absolute limits of 1950 science, but you also see the incredible dedication of the investigators who were pushing those limits.
You have to respect what they achieved with the tools they had.
Absolutely. The collaboration between pathology and botany was brilliant. But now, all these years later, the forensic trail is completely cold. The physical evidence is gone.
So justice for Anne now relies on something else entirely.
It relies on the slimmest of chances that someone, somewhere, who knew something is still alive and willing to talk. Or perhaps a deathbed confession from an accomplice. It really is the only path left.
And that brings us back to that sealed file. We know the name of a suspect, backed by compelling evidence, was given to the authorities and then buried. When you think about that, what is the true cost of sealing a file to protect someone when it denies justice for a 17-year-old girl? What do we owe Anne Noblett when the person who knows the truth is almost certainly beyond the law's reach now? It really makes you think about the absolute importance of transparency and of preserving every single piece of evidence in every single unsolved case.